Hello everyone, this is Lexicon Architect, and for today's commander we're going to be looking at Lonis Genetics Expert, a 3-mana Simic legendary creature Snake Elf Detective with Evolve. So whenever another creature with power or toughness greater than it enters the battlefield, you get to put a counter on Lonis, and then whenever one or more 1/1 counters are put on Lonis, you investigate that many times, and whenever you sacrifice a clue, you put a 1/1 counter on another target creature you control. So the overarching theme of this deck is to put counters on Lonis, generate clues, sack those clues to draw cards, and buff our creatures along the way. So let's get into the deck tech. So at mana value 1, we have 2 Dorks and Bird of Paradise and Delighted Halfling. Then we have Hardened Scales, which is going to give us an additional 1/1 counter whenever we put a 1/1 counter on a target creature. And then we have the Ozolith, which allows us to save all the counters that we had on a creature. So for example, if a creature had 5 counters on it and it dies, those 5 counters go onto the Ozolith, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you can put those counters onto another target creature. At mana value 2, we're going to talk about Agatha's Soul Cauldron. You may spam mana as though for any color to activate abilities of creatures. Creatures you control with 1/1 counters on it have all activated abilities of cards exiled with it, and then you can tap it to exile target card from a graveyard. And when a creature card is exiled this way, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. So let's say we exile a creature with flying. It's going to then give all our creatures flying that have a 1/1 counter on it. Same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death's Touch, and any other how can I say this? Any other ability, activated ability. Next, we're going to be looking at Erdwall Illuminator. Whenever you investigate for the first time each turn, you invest it again. So if you create a clue, you'll then create another clue. Then we have Heroic Intervention, which protects our board from wipes and also gives our creatures hexproof. Then we have Lonis Cryptozoologist. That basically says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you investigate, and then you can sacrifice X clues, and then your target opponent reveals cards from the top of their X cards from the top of their library, and you may put a non-land permanent card with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield under your control, and then the player puts the rest of those onto the bottom of their library in any order. Then we have to talk about Ozolith the Shatterspire. So this is another hardened scale ability. And then for 2 mana, you can put a 1/1 counter on target artifact or creature you control, and we can only activate it as a sorcery. And for whatever reason, if we don't need this card, we can cycle away for 2 to draw a card. Then we have Simic Ascendancy as another win con for us. So we could tap 3 mana to put a 1/1 counter to our creature, and then whenever 1 or more counters 1/1 counters are put on a creature you control, you put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you do have 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. At mana value 3, we got to talk about Academy Manufactor. So since we're generating so many clue tokens, while this is on the board, we will create a food token and a treasure token whenever the clue is created. Then we have cards like Cultivate and Jahiri, Friend of the Forest, and Kami of Whisper Hopes to help us ramp. And Kami is a very good mana dork for us because it also has a built-in hardened scale ability, and then it has X mana of any one color, where X is its power. Then we have Vorel of the Wholeclade, a 3-mana legendary creature, human merfolk, that we can pay 2 mana to double the number of each kind of counter on target artifact, creature, or land. At mana value 4, we're going to be looking at the Forgotten Ancient. Whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a 1/1 counter on it. So this is everyone. It's you and your opponents. If they cast a spell, put a counter on it. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you can move any number of 1/1 counters from it onto another creature. Then we have Guardian Project to help us draw cards. Herald of the Secret Stream allows our creatures with 1/1 counters on them to not be able to be blocked. Then we have Panharmonicon. Basically, if an artifact or creature enters the battlefield, causes the trigger ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers additional time. And then lastly, we're going to talk at mana value 4, we're going to talk about Wave Goodbye. So return each creature without a 1/1 counter on it to its owner's hand. So if our opponents don't have any 1/1 counters on their creatures, we can bounce all their stuff while protecting our creatures, because mostly all of our creatures at this point are going to have 1/1 counters on them. At mana value 5, we have Primal Vigor. If one or more tokens will be created, twice are made instead. And also, if one or more counters, 1/1 counters will be put on a creature, twice that many 1/1 counters are put on it instead. And then lastly, at mana value 7, we have 2 cards that I want to talk about. Displaced Dinosaurs. As a historic permanent enters the battlefield under your control, it becomes a 7/7 dinosaur creature in addition to its other types. So when we make a clue, because that counts as a historic permanent because it's an artifact, it then becomes a 7/7. And then lastly, Tangled Grove Kelp. It has Ward 2. At the beginning of each combat, other clues you control become 6/6 plant creature tokens in addition to their other types until the end of the turn. And then you can pay 2 mana if you want to sacrifice this to draw a card. So the cool thing about this is, let's say we have 5 or 6 clues on board. At the beginning of combat, those 5 or 6 clues are going to become 6/6s that should be able to attack if they didn't ETB during the same turn. And then since it says at the beginning of each combat, it allows you to block efficiently, since you're going to have all these clues that are 6/6 plant creatures. And let's see if we have any utility lands, and we do. We have Inventor's Fair. So at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. And then for 4 mana, you can sacrifice it, search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. And then you can only activate this ability if you control 3 or more artifacts. And then lastly, we're going to talk about Karn's Bastion. So for 4 mana, we can tap this, proliferate, so we can give another counter to a creature that already has a counter on it. So this is pretty cool because, if we have a big board state already with a bunch of creatures with 1/1 counters on it, we could dump 4 mana into this, tap it, proliferate, and then get an additional counter on all those creatures that already have a 1/1 counter on them. So this deck is not a budget deck. It is running you about $545. As you can see, we curve out on turn 2 and on turn 3. If you like this style of content, please subscribe to the channel.